I am Dave Henning with the Fresh Start Podcast, fresh ideas for business and personal growth. Today, my guest is Peter Christian from the Tampa area, and you've authored a couple of books, and we'll be talking about that, your experiences as adjunct professor, your Crayola story, which I'm anxious to hear about. So, Peter, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm very glad to meet you, and you have done some trade show designs and seminars in the Pittsburgh area. You've done some stuff with the Department of Transportation in South Dakota, guest lecturer at Lehigh University, Rutgers. Tell us a little bit about your story. You've got two best-selling books. I like the titles. What about the vermin problem and influences and influencers? So you were in pest control or what?
A lot of people ask me that. I get a lot of attention, but no, it has nothing to do with extermination. At least I don't think so, anyway. It has to deal with a very interesting situation I had with one of my clients. They were not the most cooperative. They did not communicate well during the project. And what we were trying to do was to look at either expanding their current facility or looking for a new facility for them. We finally decided that expansion in the current would make the most sense. We're having the last meeting with them to go over what the expansion would look like, and we were reorganizing the facility, and we were putting the production area where the storage areas were, the warehousing. And the owner said to myself and my colleague, well, what about the vermin problem? And we looked at each other and said, what vermin problem? And they said, well, we're in kind of an old mill, and we still have some remnants of the meal that was ground there and so forth. And we still have vermin. And right where you want to put production, which is where the storage was, so I'm not sure what the big deal was, we have a vermin issue. And we said, and so we worked on this for 7 months now, and that never came up. That was never an issue up to this point. So it kind of blew the entire meeting and everything we were doing. And I just thought to myself when I was putting the book together, that would be a catchy title. That'll get people's attention. And then from there, we'll see how well things go. So it was all about communication, that segment of the book, about how you need to communicate well with each other if you want to get things done properly.
Yeah, you are spot on that point. It's all about.
Yeah, there's always, I say there are three aspects to communication. The first one is what we all do. We verbalize to each other, just as I'm doing with you, or we email, or we write a letter, or whatever the heck it is that we do. But that's only the first part. The second part then is that just like you're kind of doing with me, you're nodding to at least recognize what I'm saying. Not necessarily that you're agreeing, but you're hearing me, you're understanding what I'm saying, and that should be part two, because if you don't have that, if I'm just babbling and you're going, we really don't have a communication going on. The third part then is an understanding. So, yeah, you've listened. Yeah, you kind of nodded. But do you really understand what I'm trying to say? You don't have to agree with it. In fact, in a lot of communications, you don't have total agreement, but at least you understand. And then we can start from there to hash out any disagreements and come to some kind of a compromise or an understanding about what it is that we're going to do, or whatever the case may be. But if you don't have those three components, to me, you really don't have communication. And I found that out throughout my career, sometimes unfortunately, because I left it go to where I just sent it out and thought people were going to pay attention and do whatever they need to do. And unfortunately, they didn't. So I learned the hard way. So I practice and try to preach that as much as I can now.
Well, and it's all about relationships and not just as I have on like LinkedIn. Some people just want to sell, and pitch, rather than there's an old saying that says, find a need and fill it, find a hurt and heal it. And you've got to be listening to do that. And I'm getting better, hopefully, about there's an old ancient book that says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because as you know, communication, if you're not communicating, that can kind of bring up a little feelings of anger perhaps, or whatever. So it's very important very important. There's another great saying I heard with a nonprofit that I work with high school kids, and it's called "Earn the Right to Be Heard." So I have no right to say anything or suggest anything unless I have earned the right with you or with anybody else for that matter to be heard. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're the one that's doing all the talking, you're going to turn people off. You've got to listen to them. It's got to be a dialogue that goes back and forth. Sometimes it may not be 50-50, totally 100% equal, but you've got to listen to the other person. You've got to understand where they're coming from, what their viewpoints are. If you dominate, you're looking for trouble.
Yeah, those kind of clients or relationships don't last long term, if at all. Wouldn't you wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And being a consultant, you learn to definitely listen because a lot of times you find out things that you didn't know or they didn't quite tell you before anyway. So the more you listen and get information, the better it is for you in trying to work with the person that you're or people that you're trying to work with.
I got my biggest radio client years ago by going in with no brochures and no fun facts about how tall our tower was or how many watts we had or whatever. I went in with a legal pad with no expectation, just asked questions for 1 hour, just asked questions and wrote it all down. And I said, well, let me see if I can put something together for you that makes sense. And it was the biggest sale I ever had. Wow, what a shift for me to actually just ask questions. It was just an amazing epiphany, if you want to say that. And then you also wrote the book Influences and Influencers. So what's the story behind that book?
Well, after the first book, and while I was working on that, the person who was kind of guiding me through it said, nobody ever writes just one book. And I kind of looked at her and said, well, that wasn't in the game plan. And this may be the first time you ran into that. But anyway, the more I thought about it, there were other things that I want to talk about. The first book was more about decisions that companies make and actions they take and how they can be harmful or how they can be good and how you're kind of a fine line between being very good or being very bad. The second one, influences and influencers, is more about as we go through life, how the interactions we have with people, whether they're our family, whether they're our college professors, our bosses, or executives that we work with, the clients that we run into, our friends, and so forth, how they impact our lives in a variety of different ways. Very positive in the fact that they give us encouragement, they give us good advice, they can provide a helping hand maybe when we're down and out. And also, there are people who don't have our best interests at heart, and we have to kind of watch out for them. And even though we have to deal with them, you've got to do it in such a way that it doesn't hurt you, and that things come out okay in the end. And then there's also we're bombarded with all sorts of stuff with television programs and news media 24 hours a day and that. And we get influenced by what we hear and again it's a matter of choosing whatever it is that we're going to pay attention to, and we need to hear all the sides. We can't just stick with one side and listen to that because there's propaganda in everything and there's bias, and you really need to get all the sides of the story, so to speak, before you really make up your mind. So influences and influencers is talking about that, talking about some people who've had a dramatic impact on my life and have really helped me. I could never thank them enough for all that they've done. And they did it because they wanted to. They felt it was the right thing to do. They had my best interests at heart. And I'm really appreciative of that. And I think most people probably are in the same situation. We don't get to where we're getting totally on our own. There is a lot of help out there, and we need to recognize that and appreciate it.
Is there any one person in particular that just really stands out to make a really positive influence? Now, you said many, like myself, I have many, but anybody in particular just kind of jumps out and really made a difference for you?
Well, I hate to narrow it down to one, so let me do two real quickly.
Okay.
One of my professors at school, who was my advisor, my thesis advisor when I was doing my graduate work at Lehigh University, professor by the name of Wally Richardson. And Wally was an old Navy man, and he had worked with some of the pioneers of industrial engineering, the Galbraiths, if that name is familiar to you. And he was the most down to earth person. He loved to have sayings. I still use some of the sayings that he would always throw out when we were talking. But he was so encouraging, and he said to me, "You're going to make it in this world." He said, "And you want to know what? People are going to pay you for the knowledge that you have." So right off the start, he saw that, and we would have great conversations and dialogues, and he was just a wonderful thesis advisor. And a dirty little secret is, I may be one of the only people who graduated from Lehigh University who never had to defend his thesis, because Wally was with me throughout the writing of it. We went over it chapter by chapter. And when we got all done, he said, "I don't need to hear you talk about it. I can tell you what you said." So he never made me defend my thesis. My secondary advisor was not happy with that, but I said, "Well, go talk to Dr. Richardson then," and because he's the main guy, and his word goes. So he was one. And the other person was, I think, one of the best bosses, if not the best boss I ever worked for, and his name was Bill Clymer. And Bill was the head of engineering at Crayola. And Bill was one of the most encouraging people. I would go into him and I would have a great idea, like all young people do, I think. And he never shut me down and said, "That's so stupid," or "Why are you coming out with that?" And in some cases, he would say, "We tried that once before and it didn't work. But time's gone by and things have changed. And remember, maybe it's time to try it again." So he would give me a leash long enough that I could try things without creating too much damage or hurting myself or anybody else. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. And he never had recriminations and said, "Well, I kind of told you it wasn't going to work." He was encouraging about it. He said, "Well, that one didn't work, but I'm sure the next thing that you come up with will." And then sometimes things did work. And he'd say, "Hey, it was the right time to try something different." So I learned a lot from that about encouraging people, and never putting them down and never saying, "God, that's a stupid idea." I've really learned to moderate my thoughts, because when you're judgmental right away, "Oh, well, that's a smart idea. That's bad." No, you follow it through and you give people the latitude to do what they need to do, and some good things may come out of it. So I would say those are two of the outstanding. I had plenty more that I could talk about, and they're in the book. So if you are of the want, please get a copy and read it. I think it's a great read, and I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really kind of in the theme of my life, so much so that I had a book on my mind for maybe a dozen years. I finally wrote it, and ironically, it hit #1 bestseller on Amazon, but it was actually about the power of encouragement. Just
Mm.
some simple principles about how we can touch people's lives, whatever position they're in life, from the grocery clerk to the CEOs of the world. And what a huge impact that's had on me personally, because as yourself, I had specific people, a list of people that just really were good influencers on me, and I really strive to do that day in and day out. And I'm really anxious to jump on this story and question, because yesterday I interviewed a very brilliant gentleman who has a branding company with some big major players out of the Greenville, South Carolina. He works with some major brands, but I'm really a fan of studying about branding. And so you worked for Crayola, which is a brand. If you talk to somebody about crayons, they're going to say Crayola. If you talk to someone about blow your nose tissues, they're going to say Kleenex. So Crayola is a big deal, especially since I'm still a kid. And I mean, dominating the market. And what did you do with that during those 17 years at Crayola that dramatically propelled 700% growth in a product like that, mainly for kids. But who else was it for? Everybody like me, probably.
Yeah. Um, well, it was not just me, it was myself and a lot of other people working hard. And what was really interesting is you said we dominated the market as far as crayons and children's markers. So you'd say, well, you can't really think of competition, and there was some. But what happened was, as I was there, other things started to creep into what you would call leisure time activities for children. Sports became a humongous thing. I mean, it was when I was growing up with basketball and baseball, but you've got lacrosse and hockey and soccer, and not just for boys, but for girls as well. And the arts really took off with singing and dancing and performing, and then, of course, this little thing called the internet and video games came along, which really dominated. And we had to compete against all of that because we could get shut out. So, what happened was we looked at the demographics and thought our sweet spot is really children that are 4 to 12 years old. Because even with all that other stuff, there's still that growth and that imagination that children are developing, and you just can't do it in any other medium than to pull out a piece of paper and a crayon and start coloring and drawing and coming up with, the next greatest scientific discovery that mankind needs, or drawing your family, or whatever the case, or where you've been on vacation. So we really focused on that, and it took off. And we didn't try to necessarily compete with those other things. What we tried to do was include them and say, draw pictures about, the different things that you're doing, or whatever the case may be. And we really tried to draw on that imagination. Um, and it was very successful, and we continued to grow. In addition, a couple of neat things happened. We were predominantly a crayon company when I joined, but we worked very hard at the marker market and became the leading seller of children's markers, which we weren't up to that point. We got into the colored pencil arena. We did surveys, and we were not in the colored pencil arena, and yet almost 40% of the people who responded said that at some time they had used or bought and used a Crayola colored pencil. And we thought, well, 40% of the people are saying they're already using us, we should get in there. So we did. And another big thing that happened was a company by the name of Milliken, who makes carpeting, had come up with a technology, because what they would do is they would mark their carpets with a dye or an ink of some kind, but it wouldn't wash out. So then they would have to cut that off when they sold the carpet. Well, they came up with a technology where they could wash the dye out and save that amount of carpeting. They came to us and said, we have this great product that's washable. Now, at that point, washable in our industry meant that if you colored on something and then washed it, whether it was a shirt or whatever, the color wouldn't come out. That's what washable meant. We changed the definition to parents wanted that stuff to come out. They didn't want the marker on the kids' clothes or the paint or whatever. So we developed this whole brand of washable paints and markers and crayons, and it just went crazy because it was great. Kid could mess up their clothes. Parent drops it in the washing machine, washes it out. So a combination of those things, and we worked on that. And of course, we had to build the technologies, we had to build the infrastructure to support it, and I was involved in a lot of that. So I had a hand in a lot of the stuff, and it was really cool. I worked with some very smart and very talented people.
It's got to be a sense of satisfaction and in my in my psychology, fun. I love
Yes.
having fun and accomplishing things like that. But what I hear you saying is you listen to the needs of your audience and you responded to that in very creative ways, by the way. You mentioned five, six different areas perhaps where you saw the market, where it was trending, where it was going, and you developed products to meet that need. Getting back to what I said about meeting a need,
Hmm.
and solving a problem, basically. So that's very cool. And now you're doing a lot of coaching, speaking, and seminars. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm technically retired. I don't work on a full-time job, but I still do some consulting. I've written the two books and published them, as you've mentioned. I've written a number of articles for magazines. I am an adjunct professor with Alvernia University. That might be the other school you were trying to think of in Reading, Pennsylvania. A good friend of mine started a program down there, and we hooked up, even though I'm 1,300 miles away. And he said, I need you to teach project management to industrial people who want to come into the university and get certified in project management. So I'm doing an online project management course with them, which is great. So I'm staying pretty busy, even though I'm technically retired.
Yeah, I can't imagine actually retiring, quite frankly. It'd be so boring.
Yeah, but I get to pick and I get to choose. You know, I
Exactly.
decide what I want to work on and what I don't. And when I get tired, then I can go and do something else, which you can't do at work. You know, you got
Yeah.
bosses that are watching. at all anymore. So there's a matter of competency or knowledge in there. Some people just aren't cut out for that, and they shouldn't be. Um, and there's some that just make some big mistakes. Okay, and they don't try to correct it, or they botch that up, and then it's the woe is me. Like you said, with some of these different programs, not all companies succeed right off the bat. I was just watching a thing today about Pepsi company when they were trying to get into the marketplace, and they literally were going bankrupt and tried to sell to Coca-Cola, and the owner of Coca-Cola turned them down, and they tried again, and all of a sudden they started to hit the mark, and now look at the size of Pepsi and their big competitor, Coke. If Coke had bought them out way back when, you would have never heard of Pepsi Cola, who absolutely is crazy because they're not just a soft drink manufacturer. They also own restaurants, and they own Frito-Lays and all sorts of stuff. So they're a humongous company. So we all make bad mistakes, and sometimes it really bites us.
Yeah, I love the history of that Frito brand as well, which is a very intriguing story about how the guy bought the recipe for $100 or $50, borrowed the money from his mother or whatever. And that's how we all start out when you think about it in one way or another. What brought you to choose to get into consulting?
I think I was always into it, because when I left Crayola and was looking at what I was going to do, person who was giving me advice said, a lot of the work you did at Crayola was internal consulting, and you should consider doing that with other companies. And quite honestly, coming out of Lehigh, I had an opportunity to work for Price. It was Price Waterhouse at the time, not Price Waterhouse Coopers, and they had a manufacturing division. It was roughly about 10% of their business. It wasn't all accounting. And I just didn't think that I had the background and the wherewithal at that point to go out and tell senior people who had 20, 30 years worth of experience what they were doing wrong and how they should do it better. But after having worked for about 20 years in industry and having gone through the wars and having experiences in that, I felt I had enough knowledge that I could now hold my own, and I could definitely tell people things that would help them. So I started to do it. I had talked to a number of companies about taking a job with them. That didn't quite work out, but a lot of them became clients of mine because they knew who I was. They knew what my skill levels were because I had talked to them. They became clients, and I just got into the consulting world, and it worked out very, very well. I've dealt with over 300 companies, some very, very large, and some very, very small, and some in between, in all different industries and doing all different types of things. And it's just been a fascinating experience.
One of my favorite stories of all time along that line is, and if you'll permit me to just share real quick,
Sure.
is the guy that was the consultant that was brought into a big factory because a big major piece of equipment was not working. You may know this story, and he came in and he looked it over, and he got his little tool bag out, and he took out a hammer and hit it in just the right spot, and he got it all working. And they later sent them a bill for like $10,000. They says, $10,000? You're only here for 5 minutes and you hit the machine with a hammer. What is this $10,000? He says, well, it was $1 to hit the machine with the hammer. It was $9,999 to know where to hit it.
Absolutely.
I love those stories. What you're saying is, and I totally agree, is that you're paid what you are worth.
I tend to believe that. Most of the clients that I've worked with tend to believe that. So I've got a very good track record of that. I've helped quite a few people. I've had some instances where I had arguments with clients, and we didn't have a happy parting, which is very disappointing to me. There's nothing that bothers me more because I'm really in it to try to help people. And
Right.
when they don't either accept that help, or they feel like you're trying to hurt them, which you're not, and they don't pay attention to what you're telling them to do. It bothers me. I don't want to see anybody fail.
Yeah.
It really, really bothers me. And again, when I watch these shows where the guy comes in and somebody's telling him, oh, well, we do this and we do that. And he's going, well, if you're doing everything right, then what do you need me? You feel that way. And I had that. I had that in one company. We were sitting with the owner and the plant manager, and the plant manager was saying no to everything. So I literally took the folio that I had and I closed it. And the owner said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, the meeting's over. And he looked at me and he says, what do you mean the meeting's over? I said, well, this guy doesn't trust anything that we're saying. He's disputing everything. I said, I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to help you. And if you don't want my help, then there's no sense of continuing the meeting because it's really worthless. And he says, no, 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 we'll continue. So we did. I opened it back up. I continued through. We finished it. He wound up firing the plant manager
Wow.
because the guy was hurting the business. But you get into some instances like that, and you just shake your head and you go, "I don't understand why. I'm here to help you, all right." But some people just don't accept help for whatever reason.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about expectations, and you have to lay down the expectations in advance, hopefully, and
Hmm.
communicate that. But I think what you did is what I think what Tony Robbins would call a pattern interrupt. Like, and you had to do it. I mean, you really had to do it. Fold it up and saying, we're done. I mean, that's what you call you interrupted the mental pattern, and at least the owner, got on board and rescued the situation. So, boy, 30 minutes goes by so fast when you're having
Yes, it
fun.
does.
So, how can I help you? Where can I send people to get in touch with you, find your books, and so forth?
Okay. Well, I'm on LinkedIn. If you go to Peter Christian, and you will see me, and I've got different things in there, but adjunct professor and author and so forth, because I'm sure there are other Peter Christians out there. I'm not the only one. So you can certainly catch me on LinkedIn and we can connect that way and converse. I have a website that was primarily set up for my books, but also to deal with speaking and with my writing. And that is petechristianbooks.com. So you can go on there. You'll learn more about the books. You'll also get blogs and so forth, and we can communicate that way. Or you can get me via email at phchristian and the number 53 at gmail.com. So any one of those three, just send me a message. Let me know what it is you would like to talk about. I'd love to communicate with folks and to share knowledge and see where that goes. And my books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and probably all of the other big outlets that sell books. But Amazon is the number one. So you can find the two of them on Amazon.
I'm thinking with my guest today, Peter Christian, and the cool thing about your career is as you've gone through all the seasons of your life and all the experiences, there's something to be valued about people, can I say this, our age, that
Yes.
accumulates wisdom that you can't get any other way except through experiences which you've had. So I appreciate you being my guest. And one last question,
Sure.
and here it is. What was your very first job ever when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, I worked in my father's architectural firm. I was a clerk. So I would take all the drawings that the checkers did on, and I would have to put them onto all the other drawings that would go on packages to the contractors and so on and so forth. So I got to learn a lot about drafting and architectural work and mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. It was pretty cool. It was really cool. It was a great experience.
That sounds like really fun. And I was talking with another gentleman the other day about every building that you see in any city was thought up in somebody's mind first and then put on paper or architects. And
Yep.
so we can be the architect of our own future if we want to, can we not?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Well, thank you for being with me, Peter. I really appreciated your time today. My name is Dave Henning, and this is the Fresh Start Podcast, fresh ideas for business and personal growth. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you again. I appreciate